Welcome back to Inclusive Design 24, the 2019 edition, brought to you in partnership with our gold supporters, Barclays Access and Intopia. Don't forget you can subscribe to Inclusive Design 24 on YouTube by visiting youtube.com/inclusivedesign24 and hitting that big happy subscribe button. You can follow ID24Conf on Twitter, and if you have questions for the presenters, tweet them using the ID24 hashtag, and we will ask them at the end of the session. ID24 is a global event for the global community, so we're delighted to welcome everyone watching us from, I had the list in front of me, but I can tell you we have London, we have Wales, we have Nashua, New Hampshire, Richmond, Virginia. I'm going off of memory here, even I'm surprised, and a handful of other cities. And I also believe that the AIGA Upstate New York's Cast Watch Party is kicking off around nowish as well. So welcome to you as well.
Next up, we have Elizabeth Schaefer and their presentation, Improve User Experience by Designing with Cognitive Differences in Mind. Over to you, Elizabeth.
Great. Hi, thanks so much for the opportunity to talk today. So I'm going to be talking about how to improve user experience by designing with cognitive differences in mind. So I am Elizabeth Schaefer. I am a senior front-end developer at VitalSource, where I work on our bookshelf digital textbook platform, and I also work on our internal design system. I've had this job for a long time now, but have really focused on accessibility in the last 5 years or so. In that time, most of what I've been thinking about when I develop accessible websites is how they can be used by people with limitations in their vision, hearing, and mobility. So that includes things like having the right color contrast ratios, including captions on videos, and making sure that interactive elements are large enough to use without too much difficulty. But there's another area I don't think about as often, which is when people have limitations in their cognition. Cognition affects how well you can concentrate, remember, and make decisions. Cognitive disabilities are the most common type of disability among children and affect working age adults more than visual and hearing disabilities combined. But they can also commonly be invisible disabilities, which can make them less noticeable and a bit more mysterious. Cognitive impairments include things like intellectual disabilities, developmental disabilities, autism, dementia, dyslexia, and ADHD, among others. To narrow things down a bit, we're going to be focusing on ADHD, or Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. One of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this is because I have ADHD. I just want to clarify that when I talk about my own experience, it's just anecdotes that really only apply to me. But I really like learning from people with different backgrounds, so I figured it might be helpful to share how things work for me. So I'm going to start with an overview of what ADHD is and how it affects people, and then we'll go over ways to make sure that the websites and digital applications we build work for people with ADHD. So what is ADHD? ADHD is a neurodevelopmental disorder that impairs an executive function. Executive function is responsible for things like paying attention, organizing and planning, and starting tasks and staying focused on them. These are things that everyone has difficulty with at some point, but people with ADHD experience these things to a much greater extent. They negatively impact multiple aspects of life, like school, work, social life, etc., on a consistent basis. There are some people who think that it's not a real disorder and that it's really just bad parenting, too much sugar, too many video games. But research has shown that there are physical differences in brains with ADHD and that it's highly heritable. So if you have a parent with ADHD, there's a 57% chance that you have ADHD too. ADHD is a lifelong condition. It's not something that only kids have, and it's not something you can grow out of. Boys are diagnosed much more often than other genders, but that's likely just because symptoms in girls can be harder to spot. Most research has been done on boys, which means that diagnostic criteria are biased towards the symptoms that boys typically exhibit. People of color are also much less likely to be diagnosed with ADHD, even when they show the same symptoms. It's funny because it's very common to hear that ADHD is overdiagnosed. But what's actually happening is that people that aren't young white boys are most likely underdiagnosed. Treatment for ADHD can be very effective, but if you don't know that you have it, there's not much you can do about it. So that is basically what happened to me. I never even considered the possibility of having ADHD because I'm basically the exact opposite of the stereotype I had in my head. I was relieved to be diagnosed a few years ago because now I understand how I work and what I can do to make things better. But before that, I had no idea what my limitations were. So that means I never knew that I could potentially ask for accommodations, and I never looked through accessibility settings on the apps and websites that I used because those settings weren't quote unquote for me. Because of this, I'm a huge advocate for not hiding useful settings and tools under the accessibility label. There are so many people that don't identify as being disabled, but would absolutely benefit from accessibility. A good example of this is anyone that slowly acquires a disability over time. If you're getting older and your hearing is slowly fading away over the course of multiple years, there isn't one clear point in time where you go from not having a disability to becoming disabled. And after spending your entire life identifying as someone that doesn't have a disability, it can be hard to recognize when that change does happen. In the case of cognitive impairments, it can sometimes be even more confusing to see the line between what's considered neurotypical and what's not. Either way, the increased cognitive load that people with ADHD have to deal with is something that affects everyone at some point. So anything we do to help people with ADHD will also be helpful for everyone else. There are 3 subtypes of ADHD, primarily hyperactive/impulsive, primarily inattentive, and combined. The hyperactive/impulsive type is probably what people usually think of when they hear ADHD. People that are predominantly hyperactive/impulsive might have trouble sitting still. They may talk excessively, be impulsive, interrupt, or have trouble waiting their turn. So they're quick to do things without thinking first, and they feel the urge to physically move a lot of the time. The inattentive type of ADHD used to be called ADD, so that would be attention deficit disorder without any hyperactivity. I'm not sure why this ended up being renamed because I find it very confusing. Anyway, people that are predominantly inattentive can actually end up looking very different than people that are hyperactive and impulsive. When someone is predominantly inattentive, they might appear shy or in their own thoughts, have trouble finishing tasks, slow to process and respond, easily distracted, or forgetful in daily activities. And finally, there's the combined type for people that are both hyperactive and inattentive. So these subtypes have a wide range of symptoms, but they share a common set of limitations. The primary limitation is on executive function. Like I mentioned before, executive function is the set of cognitive processes that allow you to prioritize the list of tasks, start working on the top priority, and follow it through to completion. When executive function is working properly, it lets you think things through, weigh the consequences, and go forward with what you should be doing, even if it's not what you want to be doing. But when this process is impaired, the thought process is more along the lines of, I know I have a list of things that to do that are important, but all of them seem equally important, so I don't really know where to start. And I don't feel the need to start right now until it's an emergency and needs to be done like immediately. I logically know exactly what I should be doing, and I know of and have tried many organization and productivity tools and techniques that help other people, but there's just this disconnect between knowing what to do and actually doing it. Another limitation we can think about is regulation of attention. ADHD has attention deficit in the name, which makes it sound like the main problem is lack of attention. But that's very misleading, and I wish that it was named something else. It's common for people with ADHD to actually be really good at focusing their attention on one thing. This is called hyperfocus or flow, and it can almost feel like a superpower, being able to dive deep in learning everything there is to know about something new. So the problem isn't not being able to pay attention to things, but it's in having control over which things we pay attention to. Finally, ADHD can have a significant impact on working memory. I just mentioned how executive function negatively affects the ability to prioritize. When every piece of information comes in at the same priority level, that means you have to kind of try to hold on to everything at once. And you can't do that. And so that means that you might accidentally hold on to something not important while forgetting something that is actually very important. So application in web accessibility. Now that we have a general understanding of what kind of limitations people with ADHD have, what can we do to make sure that the things that we build are accessible? Here are 3 things we can do. 1, we can show important content. 2, use motion for clarity. And 3, let people customize. This obviously won't cover everything, but it's a good start. So let's go through each of these things more in depth. First, let's talk about showing important content. What I mean here is that if there's any content I need in order to perform primary actions, that should be visible to me at a glance. So let's talk about icons and text labels. We're going to be looking at the Google Play Music homepage, so you can see what I'm talking about. If you look along the left edge, there's a column of icons. There's an icon shaped like a house, one that looks like 2 stacked squares with a music note on top, a clock with a counterclockwise arrow around it, and a star, among others. These link to all the main areas you can go to, things like your music library, things you've recently played, top charts, etc. So when you have a design like this, you need to make sure that each link has an accessible name. So even though we don't see any text here, we need to at least include hidden text for screen reader users, which we can do using an ARIA label or off-screen text. Once we do that, it's technically fine at that point, but only if we can make sure that people will understand what these icons actually mean. It turns out that there are very few icons that are universally recognizable. Most people will recognize icons for home, search, and print, but almost all other icons can end up being ambiguous and confusing. The problem is that icons aren't used consistently across different platforms. For example, Firefox uses a star icon on its bookmark button. So in that case, the star represents something that the user has personally marked as something important. But in Google Play Music, the star icon in the sidebar is a link to the top charts page, which instead is the overall favorites of the general public. So if this lack of consistency means that users won't understand what the icons represent, that means at the very least we need to find a way to show the accessible name of the link to sighted users. One way to do that is by adding a tooltip. Unfortunately, tooltips can be complicated to code in an accessible way. You can't just add a title attribute to that HTML because that only adds a tooltip for mouse users, not keyboard users. Even if you write custom code to have a tooltip that appear in the right place on both hover and focus, it's still not clear how it should work on touchscreens. Sometimes websites will make it so that the first tab will show the tooltip and then the second tab will perform the action. And other times you have to press and hold in order to see the tooltip. But since there's no standard, there's no way for touchscreen users to know if they have the option of seeing a tooltip or not. On top of these technical issues, this kind of interface can be difficult to use for people with poor working memory. Since there's no way to see all the labels at once, you'd have to view each tooltip individually in order to see what your options are and keep them all in mind before choosing which link you want to follow. So this might not seem like that big a deal. There's just a few icons here, and if you use it frequently enough, it's something you just remember and use without thinking. But I can tell you from personal experience, this never happened to me after using this daily for multiple years. I typically listen to music when I want to start focusing for work, and any little bit of friction like this can easily distract me and make me completely forget that I was about to start working. So an easy way to solve all these problems is to just include text labels next to the icons. It's funny because these links actually do have text labels, but only at certain browser sizes. I only found this view accidentally when I zoomed out one day, so it's kind of frustrating to see content being removed because my desktop browser is apparently too small. Showing labels like this is also incredibly useful for people that use voice control. It'd be almost impossible to guess what the accessible name of each link would be without them, so you'd have to use workarounds like tabbing through the interface to make a selection. Another thing we can do is making sure to wrap text instead of truncating it with an ellipsis when possible. So here's a screenshot of Jira on a page where you can browse through all your projects. There's a table, and each row represents a single project. The first column shows the name of the project, which seems pretty important to be able to see on this page. But instead of making room to show the full name of the project, either by increasing the width of the column or allowing the text in the cell to wrap, is truncated with an ellipsis. If I was looking for the project called Atlassian Product Integrations, it would be hard to find because there are 6 projects that start with the word Atlassian, and any text after that is cut off. They do have a custom tooltip you can see on hovering focus, but again, I need to check each row one at a time in order to find what I'm looking for. Quick side note, my complaint here is that being forced to view things one at a time is taxing on working memory, and it's not fair to put people in that position. But this is essentially what screen reader users have to do all the time. It can be easy for sighted users to take for granted that they have this ability to see everything on screen all at once. So while I'm talking right now about how this can affect people with cognitive issues that affect their working memory is something to think about for screen reader users as well. So back to ADHD. When I run into things like this, it's just very, very easy for me to get off track. I might spend a few seconds hovering over each row until I find the one I need. But I'm equally likely to see this and get caught up with trying to figure out how to make this work better for me in the future. My thought process usually ends up something like this. Maybe I could use custom CSS to let me see the full project name. I need a browser extension for that. So which one should I use? Do any of these extensions invade my privacy? What else do I need for better privacy? I should learn everything I can and see if I should switch my email, calendar, to-do list, notes. So I think like this all the time. It just takes a few seconds for me to get off track. And it's not like I think of something more interesting and consciously decide to put off what I was originally doing. More often than not, I just completely forget what I was originally doing. So an easy solution here is to just get rid of the code that introduced the truncation. HTML tables will natively expand and wrap text to make it fit. And just to be clear, truncating text isn't inherently bad. It's just that if the text is important to see in order to perform primary tasks, then that text should ideally be visible and not hidden. One more thing we can do to make sure that important content is easy to see is by making sure that the browser's find shortcut works. Since it can be hard for me to scan for certain things visually, I use Command F as a primary method of navigation. This is something that's almost always just worked without issue in the past, but I've been noticing more and more sites either changing this functionality intentionally or accidentally breaking it. Here's an example of a website that has purposely changed what happens when you use the Control F keyboard shortcut. This is the landing page when you log in to Airtable. It shows a list of links to all the databases I've created, so I can see all of their names and choose which one to open. If I wanted to open the database named User Research, I'd expect to be able to use Command F to open the browser's find bar, which you can see here at the bottom of the screen. Then I'd type in user and see it highlighted on the pages I typed. But this web page overrides that keyboard shortcut, which means that when I press Command F, I see this instead. So what we see here is that the find bar doesn't open as expected. Instead, focus has moved to a search text field within the page, which unfortunately doesn't have a focus outline. So I assumed that nothing happened at all until I looked more carefully. When you type within the text field, it filters the projects you see listed on the page as you type. The way this search field works is totally fine. The problem is that it's taking away something I rely on and replacing it with something that isn't equivalent. This search field only searches within the list of databases, which means I can't search for anything else on the page. For example, the word help is something I frequently search for, and I wouldn't be able to do that here, even though there's a help link in the upper right corner. If we go back and look at the first example of icon buttons without visible text labels, you can see how this design won't let you find anything by text. If I know that I want to find the link for recently played, but don't know what the icon looks like, there's no way for me to search for it since there's no text. And if we look again at the table of projects in Jira with the truncated project names, this won't let you find by text either. In this case, the full text is technically there, but visibly truncated using CSS. So if I try to search for text that's cut off, the search bar will let me know that a match exists somewhere on the page, but I won't be able to see where it is. I watched Eric Bailey's ID24 talk earlier today, and he made a point that I really liked. He said, when we throw out what the browser gives us for free, we don't realize there are very real and important things we sacrifice in doing so. This is a great reminder to, first of all, check and see if what you want to do exists natively. And if it doesn't, try to make sure you understand exactly how browser defaults are expected to work before making any customizations. The second idea I want to talk about is using motion for clarity. Unnecessary motion can be incredibly distracting. I probably see this most commonly on news websites where I'm trying to read an article, but there's a video of a news broadcast that starts automatically and follows me around. It follows me as I scroll down the page. Here is an example of a website with a lot of motion going on. I'm going to describe it first, then show what it looks like in motion because it's kind of hard to do both at the same time. So this is a page on the Product Hunt website where we can see a list of products. Each item includes an image thumbnail, which may or may not be animated. When they are animated, they loop forever. So here is what this looks like. This is the most extreme example I've seen in a website that I use pretty regularly. Usually if there's something moving on the page that distracts me, I'll try to hide it. This could include scrolling until it's out of sight, covering it with my hand, or going into the browser dev tools to hide the offending element. None of these things really work in this case since there are so many GIFs throughout the website. I ended up learning that some browsers include a way to control how animations are handled. I've only used this in Firefox and Chrome on Mac, but both of those give you the option of adjusting a global setting for how to handle animations. They can either be on all the time, which is the default, or you can make it so that it plays just one time and then stops, or that animations never play at all. On the other hand, motion can be really useful for enhancing understanding. I have an animation here from Google's material design documentation, which shows how you can use animation to convey things like hierarchy and order. So it starts out showing 3 UI cards in a row. Tapping the first card zooms it in to fill the screen and includes more details. Swiping this to the side makes the other cards slide into view one at a time, and swiping down zooms back out to show all the cards again. Using motion in this way makes it easy to see where each card is in relation to the others. While this can be really helpful in this context, it unfortunately isn't the right solution for everyone. It's possible that motion like this can be disabling for people with vestibular disorders. So how do we deal with this when something that's helpful for one group of people ends up being harmful for another? Here's an idea. Let people customize. Give them control over how things look and behave. Going back to the idea of how motion can be distracting, it's possible to use the prefers reduced motion media query. This checks the user's settings at the operating system level to see if they've checked that they prefer reduced motion. If they do, you can use this media query to either tone down or completely remove any motion within the site. I usually see this mentioned in the context of primarily helping users with vestibular disorders, and that it also happens to help people who have trouble focusing their attention. The problem I have with this is that from this single setting, there's no way of knowing why somebody has turned it on. If they have a vestibular disorder where any motion at all might cause symptoms like nausea and migraines, then they would probably want as much motion as possible removed. But if they have ADHD and just want to remove distracting animations while keeping those that help with understanding, help understanding where they are on the page, then we can't really use this one setting to help both groups of people. So one potential option could be having custom settings within your website. For example, in Twitter's accessibility settings, there's a motion section, which allows you to separately control whether or not you want to reduce motion for in-app animations and if you want videos to autoplay. I could imagine breaking reduce motion into subsections. For example, maybe you'd want to let users have control over turning off extraneous animations, but keep those that help show hierarchy and context. Or maybe you'd want to let users turn off animations that play independently, but keep animations that are a direct result of user interaction. I'm not exactly sure what the right solution is here, but I want people to see how this isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. Something that's still in development that I recently learned about is personalization semantics. The idea behind personalization is to come up with a way to allow each user to modify the UI in a way that works best for them. This is a work in progress, but ideally there will be a specification that defines standard semantics, which can be used to customize how things are displayed. We talked earlier about how icons can be confusing because they're used inconsistently across different applications. With personalization, it would potentially be possible for each user to have the option of choosing their own preferred symbols, which would be mapped to any elements using the expected semantics. Here's an example of how this might work on buttons. There's two buttons here, one labeled help and the other labeled reply. If there was a way to include semantic meaning to these buttons via something similar to an ARIA attribute, users would be able to target these elements and add symbols according to their own preferences. One person might prefer seeing a lowercase I symbol on help buttons, while another might prefer seeing a question mark. If this kind of semantic information was made available across websites, users would be able to maintain consistency. And by not having to figure out the underlying meaning on each website, cognitive load would decrease. Beyond symbols, there's a number of other things that could potentially be personalized. There could be semantics that assign importance to different elements, which could let users hide less important details. There could be semantics that let the author include additional information that isn't displayed by default, but could be turned on for people that need extra help. There could be a way of using different language levels so that people could simplify the text if needed. This is all pretty new to me, so if you're interested in learning more, you can look into the work that the Personalization Task Force is doing. And if you haven't watched it already, John Folio just went over a lot of this in his ID24 talk right before mine. So I'm really excited about these ideas, and I am looking forward to see how this progresses. In the meantime, it's generally a good idea to support custom user style sheets. Letting users override styles gives them control over how they consume content. And the best way to support this is by using semantic HTML and ideally using CSS class names that are human readable. It's pretty common to see class names that are just random characters that will probably change without warning. And I think a lot of this comes from the increasing popularity of CSS and JavaScript. Here's an example of how I use user styles. This is what my Twitter homepage looks like by default. You can see navigation links on the left. The main content is the live Twitter feed. And on the right are suggested trends I might want to look at. This whole page is super distracting, which I'm sure is the point. Twitter wants me to stay on Twitter. The problem is that I use Twitter to learn about work-related topics, and sometimes I'll want to look up something I had read about earlier. I almost always completely forget what I was going to do as soon as I get to the homepage. I don't even like browsing social media, but this still happens. So what I had to do was install the Stylus extension in Firefox, which lets me write custom styles for specific websites. The underlying HTML on Twitter uses obfuscated classes and isn't easy to come up with CSS selectors in a way that will be resistant to breaking in the future. But I was at least able to hide what I need for the time being, which is basically everything except for search and a handful of links to things like notifications and DMs. Okay, so let's review. Let's go over what we've talked about. Here are some ways we can improve cognitive accessibility. We can show important content. Icons should ideally have text labels, wrap text instead of truncating, and make sure that the browser find shortcut works. It's also important to use motion for clarity. Unnecessary motion can be very distracting, but using motion to enhance understanding can be really helpful. Finally, it's important to let people customize. You can look into using prefers reduced motion. I'm looking forward to see what happens with personalization semantics, and it's important to make sure that people can use custom style sheets in order to make things look the way they want. And that is it. Thank you very much. And I'd love to hear if there are any questions.
Thank you, Elizabeth. That was awesome. I appreciate that entire session. I especially like some of the calls back that you made to some of the previous sessions, which is a good reminder that so many of the things that we're talking about today are interrelated, that one tends to build on the other and vice versa. Estelle, do we have any questions?
That was fantastic, Elizabeth, and I felt seen. I wanted to share a comment that someone made, which is that someone has been experiencing some of the issues that you discussed and thought it was just them. So they said that everyone so far has been something which bothers me too, but now that I know that they can cause bigger problems for others, I'll be more vocal. So thank you for sharing all those UX patterns. One question is, with prefers reduced motion, a lot of people still want to see motion, but can't handle all motion. As developers, should we put all motions or animations under prefers reduced motion, or how do you determine which possibly useful animations, such as an icon shaking, because that's what the person's supposed to fill out next, should be put under the media query for supports reduced motion? If that made sense.
So I guess I'm not sure. But I think it's a good idea to definitely look and see what the user has chosen for that setting. And if they prefer reduced motion by default, probably turn off as much as you can. But If there's anything that can be helpful, like I showed with like cards moving around and like being able to see where you are, maybe adding additional options to turn those specific things back on. But I'm not really sure. I haven't built anything that way. It's just something that I've noticed where I get excited about being able to turn motion off, and then I'm like, wait a minute, it turned off something I need, and I kind of have to turn it back on now because it's hard to use without it.
Right. I feel the same way.
I also feel the same way. So thank you both for saying that.
So everyone who has been watching feels seen as well and heard. Well, thank you. That was really fantastic. I don't see any other questions. Let me refresh one more time to see if anything else came through. And nope, that was it for the questions. So thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. For our viewers/listeners, if you like this session, hit the big, happy, shiny red YouTube like button. I think it's red. I actually don't know. And don't forget that you can subscribe to youtube.com/inclusivedesign24 for future notifications. A reminder that Inclusive Design 24 is brought to you with the thanks to our gold supporters, Barclays Access and Intopia, our silver supporters, Adobe and SiteImprove, and our bronze supporters, Samsung Internet, DQ Systems, and the Paciello Group. It is also captioned by MyClearText. Inclusive Design 24 will be back on the hour with Courtney Cox Wayfield and their presentation for Folk's Sake, Designing Inclusive Digital Content. Don't miss it. We look forward to seeing you in about 18 minutes. And thank you again, Elizabeth. And I'm going to, where's that stop button? There it is.